Audits and Governmental Occupancy Committee to order. And I would suggest that for item number 3, that we put that on consent as a note and file item. It's I think a somewhat dated item. The more up-to-date item is going to be heard in Budget and Finance anyway. So without objection, other than that, let's start with item number 1.
Item number 1 is the City Controller Report relative to the follow-up correspondence to the report entitled Review of the Supply Management System Controls over Purchasing Authority.
And if we could have the controller give us an overview of this audit, and then the department respond on where they think things stand currently.
I'm Terry William Newman, go by Will. Title of our project was a review of the supply management system controls over purchasing authority. And we primarily focused on Department of General Services, DSD. The city's supply management system is the principal electronic information system used to manage the commodity procurement process. It is a distributed system that relies on data input by end-user department staff. Using SMS, department staff purchase approximately $1.5 billion worth of need of mostly commodities on an annual basis. Hundreds of individuals with designated SMS user IDs enter and authorize thousands of purchase transactions on a daily, weekly basis. Any system of this size and complexity involves significant risk. To control this risk, SMS limits access with user IDs, and by allowing but not requiring 2 or more people to participate at different steps or stages in the purchasing cycle, such as entering an order, approving the order, recording receipt of goods, and so forth. SMS automates segregation of these duties by allowing system staff to tailor each SMS user's purchasing authority according to their organizational authority. If I'm entering a transaction, I might have a lower level of SMS authority. If I'm approving it, have a different higher level of authority. We conducted our audit to determine if user departments have adequate controls regarding SMS system access in order to minimize the risk of unauthorized purchases. This limited scope audit was based on current SMS user rights and access by department staff, covered procurement activities by selected SMS users during the period of July 1, 2008 through June 30, 2009. One fiscal year. We obtained an understanding of the SMS security controls currently in place. We downloaded data directly out of the SMS system on over 3,000 city employee SMS users. We focused our examination on 7 user departments or bureaus. What we found, we examined user access rights and determined that over 300 city employees across many departments had SMS user rights that would allow a single individual to order, record the receipt, and approve the purchase, complete the process so that a payment would occur. This defeats the standard practice known as segregation of duties when one person completes all of these 4 portions of the purchase cycle. We identified 126 terminated employees with SMS user access, some whose access who had been terminated as long as 5 years ago, and 8 employees who were on extended leave and still had their SMS user access. We identified approximately 50 employees who had at least 2 or sometimes more SMS user IDs. This can happen when an SMS user transfers or promotes and receives a new SMS user access. found that SMS and FMIS do not share security tables, but do share some information on terminated users in a way that we felt reduced efficiency. We found that in at least 2 departments and for an extended period of time, employees placed orders using someone else's user ID, sharing the user ID. This practice compromised accountability and made it difficult or impossible to determine which employee completed the purchasing cycle. We found that GST did not populate the employee ID field in SMS, making it difficult to immediately identify users with multiple SMS user IDs. GST and IT agreed with our findings and that pertain to their department, respectively, and agreed to implement sweeping changes on a periodic basis, including populating the SMS database with each employee's city ID number.
So how are we doing on all these? Why don't you give us a report on where we stand on it?
Alfred Lopez, Department of General Services. We're pretty much on target with what we stated we would do in fulfilling these recommendations. We're currently working with ITA to get the PACER data into SMS, and we will use that data to do an initial cleanup of all the outdated user IDs. We will also, we were actually waiting till the dust settles with the budget before we do this initial cleanup, and once we do that, we'll get the data cleaned up and then send a memo to all department heads to review the current user roles to ensure that they're all current. Do you have anything?
We also are planning, Beverly Dembo from ITA, we are also planning within SMS to put a change into the way the password functions so that it's required for users to change it every 90 days. So while that doesn't guarantee that people won't share IDs, it does expire passwords of people who are not active on the system.
Now, the audit recommends that greater emphasis be put on assigning key SMS tasks to separate individuals. Has that been done yet, or is that in the process of being done?
That's something we're working on. Well, once we get all once we get all the data with all, once we get all the roles set up with all the department heads, they'll verify the data and we can get that straightened out.
How long do you think it will take to implement all the remaining changes that you're looking at?
If there aren't any major problems, we should have it done by July, maybe August at the latest.
Of this year?
Yeah.
Of this year. Are there any inherent risks that will remain in terms of users making unauthorized purchases, or have all the protections that are put in made that significantly more unlikely?
I'm sorry, I don't understand that.
Well, I know there were some concerns that there was a risk that unauthorized purchases could be made at city expense under the system without the corrections. So have we eliminated that possibility with all the changes that we're making, or is that still a possibility?
I think currently it is a possibility, but you didn't find any in your review, correct, Will?
We found that several $100,000 of purchases were made using user IDs of people who were terminated. Somebody kept using somebody else's user ID after they left. But those were not, they were purchases made for city purposes. It wasn't any defalcation. But yes, that did occur.
And we don't believe that'll happen once we've made all these changes.
Well, if they have to tell people not to use other people's user ID, and that's an ongoing issue. You can share user ID, so there needs to be some fairly strict instruction that that's not appropriate.
It is part of our general policies to not have users use IDs that they're not authorized to use. So what we are planning to do as part of fulfilling these recommendations is once we get the information back from all the departments, we will run reports to make sure that what we have in the system coincides with PACER data to ensure that there are no expired IDs that are out there, and keep the departments, on top of the user roles for their department.
Any penalties for doing that? I think we made it at least a slap on the wrist for employees to keep them from doing this kind of sharing, which I know continues to be ongoing. Are we discussing that in any way?
I'm John Trivgoda with the Department of General Services. We work closely with the controller's team. They have the demand audit function that reviews transactions over $100,000. We do have existing policies and procedures in place where we have segregation of responsibilities or duties within the SMS system, and the intent is for separate controls to make sure that we don't have any irresponsible purchases, for lack of better terms. We will work with the Controller's Office to issue a citywide policy to reinforce these already existing procedures. We also have monthly training classes that we offer to new and existing SMS users, and we'll continue to reinforce that in the future training classes.
Mr. Parks, I think you had a question.
Let me ask you on the use of others' number. Is that because of the configuration where somebody turns the computer on and just uploads it and everybody comes in behind them, or is somebody actually using the number in order to get into the system?
Somebody's actually logging in with a previous employee's number or a coworker's password, so to speak. So if
so, that's just not leaving the machine on and everybody.
No,
okay.
No. It's more somebody signing in and
signing in.
Right.
Let me just ask one thing, and I think last time this was here, we asked a similar question. Back, and this goes back 100 years ago, in 2006, you guys did a report at General Services that dealt with off-peak deliveries, where we would ask those that are vendors that come to our locations to deliver that they do it in off-peak hours to cut down on the traffic. For some reason, we've had difficulty getting that out of ITGA, but we'd ask that you go back to your 06-3149 council file number. You did a very nice report, and it's been sitting in committee now for a long period. If we could ask you to look at that and implement those issues, and we'll still try to get it through the committee as we're working with their staff. But it's a lot of good information that shouldn't go to waste. And so basically, I think it's going to require the next time you do the printing to reformat your forms so that it's part of the contracts as you go forward. So I think that's, but again, it wasn't a request to throw all the forms away. It's a matter of updating them for the future. So if you could look at that file number. The other thing we're going to have
if we can make that part of our recommendation for this motion.
The other thing is that we're going to have this in Budget and Finance, so it's, again, a file number 091041, and it's basically asking you to evaluate this process called spend management that's being used in about 8 or 9 different states that say, from what we can see, is streamlined the procurement, consolidates, renegotiates, negotiation, automating of contracts. And so that's going to probably be in budget very shortly, that we'll ask that you look and evaluate that. Supposedly can save multi-million dollars in the, and I understand we have a system similar or whatever, but we just like to see if this spend management has some additional functionality that would be of help to the city.
Sure, we'd be happy to discuss that. We have gone through a re-engineering process. We've gone through the spend management process several times in the past, and we typically find that we're light years ahead of other municipalities with our practices.
We're going to ask you to just come back and tell us that, because the thing is, it's just been lingering, and so we want to get it out of committee. We'll probably have it at Budget and Finance in the next meeting or two.
Absolutely.
I'll just give you a forewarning, but that's the CF number.
Thank you.
You guys can get a jump, and if we've already doing all of it, fine.
Great. Thank you for the heads up.
And how many city employees currently have SMS access rights, and who are they? What types of groups of employees are they?
At the time of the audit, there were approximately 3,000 users citywide. They could range from clerical to field personnel to administrative to managers, runs the entire city gamut. Of course, with ERIP and other departures, that number has dwindled. I don't have a current number.
How do we decide who have these access rights? And
It's a request that's generated by the using departments and approved by their executive management.
And the people that were no longer employed by the city but were still making purchases that weren't for themselves, that were actually for city purposes, how did that happen?
Someone else using their user ID, not the person that had left. As far as we know, we leave that to their explanation. But we did see that user ID was being used and the person was no longer employed by the city.
It's easier to pick up somebody's password and generate an order rather than go through and get all the management approvals and then get a new password or new user ID.
So it wasn't a nefarious purpose. It was just a little bit of laziness or shortcutting or whatever. But
we believe it was just that. I haven't seen anything to say to the contrary.
Somebody left. We know what their password was, so we just
Correct. Yeah,
passed it on to the next person.
Yeah, and the using departments are about getting their jobs done for their constituents. So they're trying to cut the bureaucratic red tape. Do we condone it? No. We want them to follow proper procedures.
Did we ever figure out who was misusing them? Can you identify who ordered something on someone else's number?
I don't know if you have that information.
We didn't investigate. We just presented the information and we left it up to GSD.
Is there a way for you to find that out? Or to find out if what was ordered actually was appropriately used?
Off the top of my head, I can't think of a systematic way of doing that. We would need the using departments to cooperate and provide us with that information.
Because it seems like, and I don't know how that works, it seems like if somebody ordered something and it arrived, somebody would have knowledge of who did the ordering. Because that's
True.
really the key. Whoever's misusing the number is the violator as opposed to the person that left. And
I agree, but I think that we need to address it on a go-forward basis because we do know that there's holes. So we need to clean our data to make sure that we're in sync with PACER and follow the existing ITA procedures on issuing passwords for other systems.
But how would we, going forward, how would we identify systematically if somebody is using someone else's code?
Well, I think if we put the controls in place, we would mitigate, if not eliminate, that possibility from happening.
And you're confident that you've brainstormed those controls and what you will put into place would prevent this from happening in the future?
It'll be as accurate as the city's payroll. So we'd be actually using payroll data to make sure that we are catching those individuals leaving departments or leaving the city service.
Any more questions that you have? I think I'd ask that we report back in 6 months on the status of whether all these things have been accomplished. I mean, if you're confident that this will be done in the next few months, I don't think that would be difficult. Hopefully, we'll get a good report at that time. So, I would just note and file that item and ask for a report back in 6 months.
And if we could add those 2 CF numbers that I spoke about as to...
Yes, with those added. Item number 2.
Item number 2 is a City Controller Report dated January 7 and March 10, 2010 relative to a follow-up audit of the Department of Building and Safety's inspection and code enforcement activities.
Our office conducted a follow-up audit of the July 2006 performance audit of the follow-up report was issued on January 7th, 2010. The objective of our follow-up was to independently assess the department's progress in implementing the original audit's 33 recommendations. What we found is that the department had implemented 26 of the recommendations, 6 were partially implemented, and 1 was in progress as of our follow-up audit. We looked at activities from July 6th through September 09. And while these efforts are commendable, there were a few critical recommendations that require management's continued focus to ensure that audit issues have been completely mitigated. I thought I would just discuss the more critical recommendations rather than going through all 7 of the open recommendations. The first recommendation that was still outstanding dealt with determining the appropriate disposition for expired and outstanding documents, determine whether the final inspection approval or certificate of occupancy is warranted if the construction work meets applicable building codes. What we found was that expired permits had been reduced from the 150,000 that we found in 2006 to a little more than 30,000. However, the number of outstanding permits that we looked at, we're still waiting for supervisory approvals to close the jobs in their information system and issue the corresponding certificates of occupancy. Some of the unresolved permits that we tested had outstanding violations that still required follow-up inspections. The second recommendation dealt with implementing a process to identify soon-to-expire building permits, temporary certificates of occupancy, or notices to correct and required inspections to determine if there has been any activity that requires inspection or other actions. What we found is that although their plan check and inspection system tracks expired building permits, it did not track expiration dates for other official documents issued by the department, such as temporary certificates of occupancy, orders to comply, or notices to correct. So we found the same thing that we found in the previous recommendation. We identified that there were 2,000 correction notices and more than 8,000 code violations that were outstanding and unresolved. Third recommendation dealt with verifying the qualifications of deputy inspector applicants to ensure eligibility requirements are met. Found the department's policies and procedures do not require verification of all deputy inspectors' qualifications or background checks. Some of the registered deputy building inspectors provide proof of their qualifications because they're certified by the International Code Council, and that would cover like structural steel welding, structural masonry, reinforced concrete, inspectors, just to name a few. But there are other categories that do not require ICC certification, such as those inspectors that are involved with grading and methane barriers. The last key recommendation that I wanted to discuss was consider developing an integrated information system for building and safety activities and other city departments who play a role in improving buildings and structures, for example, city planning. What we found is that the department is working towards developing an integrated system internally. They have a plan check and inspection system that works for new construction, and they also have a system that works on code enforcement activities, and they were working towards integrating those 2 systems. What we found is, at the time of our audit, like, for example, code enforcement staff could readily access what was going on the plan check side with handheld devices that they used in the field. Their 3-year technology plan did include a system goal to improve information sharing between other city agencies, and they were looking to enhance the functionality for interdepartment data sharing. But a citywide integrated system for building activities has still not been developed. This was the same issue that was identified in the Controller's March 2009 performance audit of the city's process for planning conditions for development. After our report was issued, our process is to request the department to submit an action plan within 30 days. The department submitted their action plan with target implementation dates in February 2010. The department expected full implementation of the 7 outstanding recommendations would be completed by April 2010. We accepted their planned actions and implementation dates as being reasonable.
Any response or further comments?
Yes, Bob Steinbach, Bureau Chief of the Inspection Bureau for Building and Safety. And first off, we're really proud of the 26 out of the 33 fully implemented items. Item number one, to address that, our numbers are actually a little bit higher. We had 220,000 permits that we found that were expired with no action on them. So we implemented a program to reduce those, where we create a computer program that actually kicks out all the permits that are over 180 days old, which the code provides that they're not expired or shouldn't be deemed to expire unless there's no action for 180 days. Of those 220,000, we're now under 11,000, and that 11,000 number we don't anticipate will ever be much lower, because on any given day, like today, every permit that we issued 180 days ago that doesn't have any action will kick out today. So there's always going to be a floating number out there, and we see that 11,000 is probably pretty reasonable, consider we issue 130,000 permits a year. Item number two, our PCIS, our Plan Check and Inspection System that was noted earlier, is 19 years old. There's not a piece of software anywhere in the city that's 19 years old. It is archaic at best. And this probably isn't the venue to discuss, I'm sure it's not the venue to discuss, getting money for a new system, but there is a proposal in place, and that request has already gone forward to our one-stop center. The PCIS program itself was an internal program that other departments access on a limited basis, and our proposal to replace that system, we're talking about a $7 million project to do it. But it goes more to what the mayor's proposal is, or the mayor's requirement of 12-2 or development reform, and all of the departments be able to talk to each other about projects that are out there. And so the system that we're creating, or want to create if it gets funded, we'll talk to all the different departments. And in that, it actually addresses all of the issues that are remaining on here, like tracking of orders to comply, correction notices, permits, temporary certificates of occupancy, and certificates of occupancy. We track them now. We track TCOs and COs manually. We have an electronic database that one person is responsible for, and we do track the dates, and we don't let them expire. As far as correction notices, at the time of the audit and the last time that we spoke to the controller's office, we were in the process of implementing a new software program that our inspectors use in the field called Empower, that does track orders to comply and corrections, but at that time we were just implementing it, and since then it has been implemented and it is very effective. So if you have an outstanding correction on a project, we cannot close that permit or final that permit or final an inspection until that correction has been taken care of. It's not physically possible to enter a final unless you take care of that. So that check is in place. The third item, the deputy inspector program, we have implemented in all new policies to deal with that. Some of the designations that the controller's office brought up we consider them to be a deputy inspector, but because they don't require a state license, then they're more like a technician. So we do license them. As far as verification goes, the requirements to be able to hold that certificate are different than it would be for a state licensed deputy inspector. That being said, we do background checks and verifications on all deputies. We do monitoring of the deputy program. We monitor their, not only whether they have their licenses, but whether they're performing like they're supposed to. And we do field checks on them, and we have a database in place now to keep track of all that. So of all of the items that are remaining, the 7 items compressed into 4, the minor ones that are left are a major issue until we get our new PCIS system.
And how much would it cost for that system to
It's about $7
be
million.
implemented? How many things does that impede by not having that system? It seems kind of crazy to have a 19-year-old system in place.
Let me answer it by give me a short story. The system that we created 19 years ago was supposed to cost $3 million, and it ended up costing somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 million, because 19 years ago, you can imagine what technology was. The company that we hired to help us build that program recently came in within the last year to look at our program, and no one that works at that company was working at that company when this thing was built in Oracle. I mean, they were marveled at the fact that we're still using it. There's so many Band-Aids on it right now that it is choking down all of our servers. I mean, it's just amazing how big this thing has become. The program that they want to replace it with is a program that builds programs. I mean, it's so simplistic, it's ridiculous, and we can actually recover some of the costs of that by other departments sharing in the cost of putting that together. And when the product is done, it's something that any jurisdiction can use outside the city of Los Angeles, so we can actually sell that. So the $7 million is, I mean, it's not something that we're saying this would be really nice to build. It's a product that we can have the contractor come in and start working on it, and we can be up and running in a relatively short period of time. The last program 19 years ago took 5 years to build, and they were learning as they were building it.
Yeah, will it save you money and efficiencies once you
Absolutely.
implement it?
Without question. Without question. Our systems that our inspectors use right now, they all have laptop and computers that they use in the field, so that they can do anything in the field that they can do in the office. And we're this close to being able to make it so they don't even have to come in the office, which increases their efficiency, because now they're in the field 20% longer than they would normally be, which means they can do more work. The system that we have right now doesn't allow that. A new system allows us to duplicate everything that happens on their desktop.
Well, it sounds to me like it would add enough efficiency that I would certainly encourage us to look at it as we go forward. Now, on the remaining expired permits, do we know how many of those are ones where part of the work was done, and how many never had a shovel turned on them?
Of the 11,000, we can break it down to permits that were issued and no inspections were ever made, or permits that were issued, inspections were made, and it's been 180 days since an inspection was made. The computer automatically pulls these up, categorizes them based on how we've set these parameters, creates a letter. The letters get sent out to the owners and said you have to take an action within a specific amount of time. If you don't take that action, then an automatic order to comply goes out. We assess investigation fees on it, and then non-compliance will terminate the permit or expire the permit. So it's automatic actions that happen off of each one of those. As to actual numbers of each one of those categories, I don't have that in front of me.
You don't know
But
it
it
off the
changes
top of
every
your
day.
head.
It changes by the hour.
Do you have a sense of where it
Most of the
goes?
ones that are left right now are permits where work was done, but 180 days has gone by without an inspection. And I mean, if we have to speculate as to what the cause of that is, it's going to be the economy, where they've started projects and they can't afford to finish them.
How about outstanding code violations?
No, because our other system, the Empower system then that tracks corrections, will, as soon as these permits come up, these letters come up that says that you're in violation, it automatically creates an inspection on the inspector's route screen. So when that letter goes out, the inspector gets a queue on his route screen for the day that he needs to go by and check that site.
Now, I don't know, this is obviously very anecdotal, but one of my constituents mentioned to me they had an issue at a particular property, and they looked at the records of all the surrounding properties, and several of them had code violations listed that were several years old and showed that we had never followed up on them. Could that still be the case?
No, 'cause I think what your constituents were doing is looking at a system we have on our website, and it's called the Property Activity Report, where you can go in and type in any address in the city where there's been work, and it gives an inspection history, so there could be corrections issued, and then that's the last thing you saw. Prior to the audit, and one of the original items that the audit came up with is that those outstanding permits are floating out there and they've never been signed off, when in reality the project could have been done years ago.
And it was just never implemented into that particular
They never
file.
put that notation in PCIS. All the permits from the date that we implemented this new process, that can't happen because you can't close a permit until you go back in and close associated permits. Another thing,
So these are older cases then,
they're older
presumably.
cases. A lot of them, we started using PCIS fully automatic in 1997. And so some of those permits floating from 1997, which there better not be any 1997 permits in there, but you're still going to have some that are old that don't have any action on them. If you take a building like this one, you know, if any high-rise building like this could have anywhere from 50 to 150 permits on it. So in the old days, an inspector had a permit and they had a copy of it in their hand, and they would take that permit and they would write their notes on it for each day's inspection. And they get used to writing their notes on that same permit. It might have been work for this permit that's associate to the main permit, but they're putting their notes on the main permit. So while the work was done in final loft, this might have been a supplemental permit that never got cleaned out of the system. What this automated system that we have does now is it kicks those up, and eventually we get through them all. And we're anticipating, even though there's 11,000 left, there's some new ones going in every day, but we're predicting that by December there won't be a single permit that is literally over 180 days old, no matter when it was issued.
Well, that's good. Now, another question from a group of my constituents. I don't think this is the only property like this either, but there's a property in my district that has been an ongoing, constant update for about 17 years. And they keep pulling the permits and doing a little tiny bit of work or not at all, and then refiling the permits over and over. Is that something that can still happen? And is there any way to address that? Because I think you have the Winchester Mystery House. For whatever reason, they've just decided they want to keep making slight additions until they die. So should people have to deal with it, or do we have a process?
If I guessed, I'd probably miss 2 or 3 times before I pick the address of the one you're talking about. You know, the code says that you can pull a permit and it's good for 180 days without inspection, and it says after 2 years it shall expire. But shall expire doesn't mean it is expired. We have to physically take the action. And, you know, expiring a permit it can be punitive, and we don't want it to be that way. You take out a permit is to pay for plan check and inspection services. So as long as you're doing work, we're going to provide the inspections. After so many inspections on the same thing, we have a mechanism to charge extra fees for inspections. A house, they can do the work on that one permit, and then when it's done, sign it off and get another one and keep going. They can actually do a supplemental permit to change the scope of work and keep going. So you could really have a permit for a building. I can think of one offhand that's 15 years old, and the building is still not completed. But there's no mechanism in the code that allows us to say, okay, you have to finish that job or you have to tear it down. I mean, we'd have to declare it a public nuisance to be able to do that, and that's a very difficult thing to do in the courts. So we usually do whatever we can to encourage them to finish the construction. But, you know, if they plead they don't have money, then we have to declare that it's some type of a nuisance. You know, we've had structures that were unsafe because of the condition they were in, and we would go in and declare it a present, imminent, immediate, and extreme hazard. And under that code section, we can go in, city services can contract someone to go in and abate the hazard. That doesn't mean they're going to finish the project, they just abate the hazard. And then they assess the property a lien. Bottom line is it doesn't get the project done.
So we'd have to come up with some new policy process, presumably. It doesn't sound like anything in our existing
Well, if we expired the
process
permit
works.
on that one right now and just said, that's it, you're done, then what do we do with it? I mean, how do you force somebody to finish building a building? Until there's something that says, you know, the only hammer we have, if you'll forgive the pun, is that we don't allow them to occupy it until it's completed. So you could have a vacant property. Well, then you get into a whole nother issue of maintaining vacant properties in the city, which is not an attractive thing, because then it brings everybody's property values down. It becomes an attractive nuisance. In certain neighborhoods, then you have drug and gang activity. And so we do everything we can to try to keep work going. And some people, very few, really know how to work the system, and they're going to operate. And it doesn't always happen in neighborhoods that are less advantaged. I mean, there's one I can think of in the Hollywood Hills right now, a very prominent college professor that happens to have more money than sense, and he's been doing this project. He'll be doing it when I retire.
Might be the same one.
Probably.
So we'll have to think of some other way to deal with it, perhaps. What about temporary certificates of occupancy? I know there are some cases where they're intended to go on for a brief period of time, but it's intentionally dragged on for months or years, which is obviously against the whole intention of temporary certificates of occupancy. How do we deal with that more effectively?
With the new focus on that, because of the audit, we didn't want to rely on an automated system to kick it back out and say the dates are expired. What we do is we have staff that monitor those closely. And if you have a building, for instance, City Hall East was on temporary certificate of occupancy for 13 years because it was never done. There was always some work happening on it. So what we do now is when that time expires, we look at the project, and there are always conditions attached to that TCO that limit the ability to have a C of O. So they want to get the temporary off of that. What we can do is we increase those conditions, and when the more conditions you put on there, like limiting occupancy, then the more motivated the developers become to finish the property. Another thing that we've done is we've created a certificate of occupancy for a building that is not occupied, which means on some like condo projects, you can actually get a C of O on a core and shell building that has all of the path of travel, fire warning systems, exiting, and everything, but the interior units are not completed. So we can get them off of the temporary, and then as each unit comes in, we issue a C of O for the development of that unit. So that pulls some of them out of that. But before, when we weren't tracking it, we were missing out on revenue. And in this day and age, we're not interested in missing out on any revenue. So we're watching it the day it's, in fact, a week before it expires, we're knocking on their door saying, have your check ready because we're going to yank your TCO if you don't renew it or get a C of O.
And how do we do in terms of following up on inspectors' work and doing some oversight on how they're doing?
We have a policy called the MOE, which is a measure of effectiveness, and every supervisor at every level is required to do MOEs on. Every single inspector has an MOE done to look at their skills and abilities and their adherence to policies and procedures on a monthly basis, and they're rated on that.
And how do you feel about how well that system's working? Do you think it's been pretty effective?
I think it's very effective, except one area, and that is inspection consistency. We have an issue that has come to light in the last few years where we get complaints that inspectors don't inspect the same way. You'll have one inspector come out on the site, they'll give you a list of corrections. That inspector's on vacation, Inspector B comes out as a replacement, gives you a whole different list of things to do. Inspection consistency can be dealt with more effectively by keeping the same inspector on the job. In the past, one of our goals in the department under a different administration in our department was to maintain a 24-hour turnaround on our inspections, which means that 24 hours from the time you request the inspection, we will have an inspector out there to do it. Well, in order to keep up with that goal, we used any inspector we could to fill in wherever we could, so you had a definite lack of consistency. What we found is the industry doesn't care if we're out there in 24 hours. They don't care if we're out there in 48 hours. They want the same inspector on the site every single time because they establish a relationship and a rapport. So we've backed off of that goal of 24 and 48 hours. We're actually maintaining it at 48 hours right now, but we're able to keep the same inspector on the project probably 90% of the time.
Now, and years ago when I was with the city of West Hollywood, we had some of the same problems with the planning process, where you'd come over the counter, they'd give you a list of things you needed to do, and you'd come back and say, I did it, and you'd talk to a different person, and they'd give you another list of things to do, and it was almost an endless process. So
frustrating beyond imagination. It happened to me in my city when I went to get my permit.
Yeah, so I think that's a very logical system. Mr. Parks, do you have questions?
I appreciate your comments on the issue of the eyesores. We have about 4 of them in the 8th district where people have built to a certain point and one passed away and others moved on, and we have one that they can't quite get the foundation right. And I think you guys have gotten them in court, so it's been a long process, some of them 5 or 6 years, and you just can't get people to complete the project. And so it's an ongoing issue. They get them fenced and up, things of that nature. Let me ask you, we had several discussions in Budget and Finance about the whole issue of inspections and dealing with fire department, building and safety, housing, as whether there's replication of duties or whether a inspection unit could do inspections for everybody. And I'm just wondering, from your point of view, do other departments have a more recent or more sophisticated tracking system or computer system as they go forward on their inspections?
Well, I don't want to alienate my friends in housing and fire department. Our process for inspection and monitoring those jobs is incredibly sophisticated given the parameters that we're allowed to work in right now. Our latest, I mentioned it before, Empower program, which is our tracking system that we use, the software on the individual inspectors' computers is very, very, very comprehensive and very sophisticated. We
You say
standardize.
comprehensive, you saying just volume of information?
Yeah, it's.
Or options?
We track everything. And when we issue corrections, they're all in the computer ahead of time. You don't have to rely on pharmacist type scribble by inspectors on notes. Everything is pre-printed, everything is in there, every option is in there. There's ad hoc features where they can handwrite the data. When it comes to housing, though, housing looks at apartment buildings and we do not. We look at them while they're building them, we inspect them during construction, but once they're done, we're not in the same buildings that the housing department are. The fire department inspectors, we are doing inspections alongside the fire department during construction where they're doing testing of this fire warning systems and suppression systems. We look at the hardware as it's going in, and then they do the testing. The only duplication I think that we're seeing right now is in the plan check part of fire department and building and safety for fire warning systems.
And those other departments, what kind of technology are they working with?
As far as tracking,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to ask you, and I know there's all this complication in building and safety between special funds and enterprise funds, whatever. Do you have the ability to fund your needed technology with the enterprise fund as relates to if it's being used specifically by personnel that work within the enterprise?
Difficult to answer in that in order to enhance our ability with the new system, obviously, we don't have the $7 million in the enterprise fund. We were looking at the
I'm just wondering if that could be a partial way to get it funded. I mean, I don't recall on the enterprise fund whether it's just for people or whether you can.
Well, the enterprise fund pays for everything that we do, and so there's system development fees and so forth that are in there to take care of that. We have our IT staff to take care of it. But when like the purchase of the laptops, that didn't come out of the enterprise fund. That came out of the one-stop committee, and so because it was directly related to customer service. So, and the laptops now are 4 years old. And so we're getting into that scenario where the equipment that we have isn't able to sustain the software and the technology. So, the short answer to your question is no, there's not money to build it. There's money to support it while we have it, but the hardware and the technology we have to purchase outside the enterprise fund.
So you can't buy the hardware, but once it's operational,
We can sustain it.
you can sustain it.
Absolutely.
Okay. The other thing I was going to ask you that recently, I think you went through a process and increased your fees.
Yes.
One of the things in that planning did a similar process, and one of the things they came up with towards the end was a surcharge for a specific fund to deal with community plans. Do you have the ability on your fees to add a surcharge to upgrade the equipment?
We would have to establish that. We don't have it in place right now to do that. We'd have to establish that fee.
I know I'm saying, but again, with establishing, is it anything that prevents that?
Not that I'm aware of.
Let me ask Paul, if you could look at that. Is there something that we could do a surcharge specifically for the equipment upgrade and it goes away once the thing is up? Because like I said, I can understand you working with a 19-year-old legacy system, but again, it's a matter of whether there's a way to create the funding where if you're dealing with, what, 100,000 permits a year.
130,000.
130,000, and whatever dollars you put on that for X number of years to fund the system, and then if you could use the enterprise to maintain it. Just a
Well,
matter of looking for a source of
Yeah,
funds.
even if we, and that's a good point, you establish that, you put that money aside, you buy the hardware, and you know that they've always said, if you want to chase technology, you better rob a liquor store and have tennis shoes on, because you're never going to catch it.
That's right.
And so by the time you get the technology and you put the hardware, we put state-of-the-art laptops in their hands, but 4 years down the road, those laptops are no longer state-of-the-art. And so as the software and the more you have, the more you think of. The more you create with the software, now we want to track this. And so we need to have the hardware that keeps up with it. So we can Band-Aid that. If that's sustaining that technology, fine. But 4 years down the road, then we'd want to replace them again. So
What was your fund for the laptops?
cost for the laptop?
I mean, what was the fund you used for it?
We use the one-stop committee. So there's every time you purchase a permit, there's a percentage of that permit that goes into establishing the one-stop fees, which handles all the customer service areas, the one-stop centers, when you come into our offices and you see building and planning and public works and so forth. And so every dollar there is used for directly related to customer service. And since our inspectors are in the field directly dealing with customers, then we use the laptops for that.
But when you purchase, how many did you purchase at one time?
We bought them in stages over the years, because code enforcement has them too. So I've got 300.
These are different than the permit, the handhelds. These are
These are regular
Regular
laptops. There's mini versions of laptops. They're not a full-size laptop. And the code enforcement now has a touch screen. There's actually newer than ours. I say ours in my bureau, inspection bureau. So to replace 320 laptops for inspection bureau at $2,400 a copy. Now you understand $2,400. You say, well, that's ridiculous for a laptop. But you're talking about a portable printer. You're talking about a docking station. The power cords that go with them, a car power cord's $200. So it kind of adds up. But the printers that we have, we have to be able to print out the correction notices to hand it to a contractor. So we have to have a very small.
It still sounds like a high number, 2,400.
I said that too because I just went out and bought a laptop for myself and all that. But then when
They're so much cheaper now.
Well, they are. You can buy a laptop for $500, but when you get all the equipment that goes with it, then the price goes way up. Our systems, our IT guy is phenomenal, and I asked him to price it out because we're looking at putting in a request to do this. And you're talking about just under $1 million replaces every laptop in my department for every single inspector. Now, $1 million is a lot of money, but when you look at what they're doing with them, it's pretty cheap.
Yeah. But you said you got them incrementally, so
And that's how we've done it. We've done them, 30 at a time over years, so that as the oldest ones wear out, then we would get new ones to replace them.
So you have a planned replacement program?
We do, but the budget over the last 2 years just killed that. Yeah. So, we looked at having things in place after 3 years. You want to replace them after 3 years. Now we're into year 4, and with no end in sight.
Do you still have access to the one-stop funds?
The one-stop money now, it used to be able to do it under $50,000. You didn't have to get council approval, but council just recently took action that says that they now have control over the one-stop money. So the committee still makes a recommendation, but council has to approve the expenditure.
But are there funds there if you went through a replacement?
There are, as I understand it, and don't quote me on the exact numbers, but there's somewhere between $7 and $9 million in the one-stop. The money that we wanted to use to build the PCIS system is about a little over $7 million, but we don't need it all in one lump. Figured we could do it over 2 years so it wouldn't deplete one-stop, because one-stop you put about $2 million a month back into it. So,
Well, I wonder if we should do a motion with this surcharge to direct the CLA and the CAO and Building and Safety to work together to create and implement the surcharge that you were talking about to fund this.
I think if you tied into
Why don't we make that
see what funds are available, that whole issue, because I think that system, if we can get a surcharge, I would think if the one-stop can fund it and you could replenish it with a surcharge or something.
I think other departments have access to that
Yes.
funding source too, yeah.
right. Any department that participates in the one-stop center has access to that. As a matter of fact, fire department and city planning, other departments have put together the same requests to build their system. And since we've talked fire department, they've said that they would back down in favor of ours because they realize that ours is going to encompass everybody and they would have access to it too.
Mr. Chairman, your request for the motion, or you could just put that as an instruction in your committee report on this matter to council, asking the departments to look into this matter and report back to you.
That sounds fair enough. Let's do it that way.
Thank you.
Another question on code enforcement. How have you been coordinating with the city attorney on development of this administrative citations program that's been talked about for code enforcement?
I really can't speak to that because I haven't been involved with that. Sorry, I can find out. I know they
That
are
would be good.
actively pursuing it, but I don't know to what lengths they're involved right now.
Do you have any sense of when that program might be implemented?
I know that it is a huge priority for our general manager and his new PEP plan that he's recently put forward. It is the #1 priority in Code Enforcement Bureau. You want
Well, I wonder if you could get that back to our committee at our next meeting. And lastly, I know I've had a problem multiple times in my district where there's an order to comply that goes to both a tenant and a property owner, commercial property owner, and they each blame each other, and each one says they didn't get notified, and each one says the other's responsible. How do we deal with that in a more effective way?
We only issue, in building and safety, we only issue orders to comply to the owner of record of the property. We don't issue to tenants. Housing department, if it's an apartment building, will issue to both on habitability issues.
Well, my most frequent problem is in restaurants and commercial business districts.
Yeah, we usually don't know who, there's a lot of tricky stuff that goes on with ownership, and especially in restaurants and some retail, because ownership can change and it may not show for 6 months in the county records, and we have to go off the county records, so we'll cite everybody in sight. But the bottom line is, if it comes down to legal action, we only have legal recourse on the owner of record. So we use kind of a shotgun approach on issuing the orders.
Anything else we can do to make that a clearer, quicker, more transparent process?
Outside of making the county make their records more accurate, I don't know how we would do it. Because we have direct access to their records, so the moment they're changed, we see the owner. Usually when we get them into court, or if we do an administrative hearing in the department, then the people show up and it kind of we wade through it at that point. If the administrative hearing isn't effective, then we do a city attorney hearing, where the city attorney will actually preside, and we'll bring all the people that have been cited in at that point, and we'll find who the owner is at that point, long before we'd ever have to go to court.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? If not, I guess we'll receive and file that motion with the direction that we've given previously.
Thank you.
And so hopefully you'll be back with the information we asked for it at our next meeting too. Thank you. Next item, number 4.
Item number 4 is the City Controller Report dated September 17 and December 10, 2009, relative to the Audit Report entitled Audit of Revenues and Expenses at the Los Angeles Convention Center.
We issued our audit report in September 2009. The purpose of the audit was to evaluate the department's internal controls over revenues and expenses. For example, we evaluated internal controls over contracts, payroll, and overtime. With respect to billings, we checked to make sure that a billing resulted for each service provided and that billings were accurate and timely. The audit covered the period from July 2007 to February 2009. Some examples of findings, first of all, we found that there's opportunities to increase space rental revenues by implementing a flexible demand-based policy. At the time of the audit, the convention center was limited to charging exactly 32 cents per square foot for its space rentals, so they couldn't charge any higher or any lower. We believe that revenues could potentially be charge more on weekends than they do on weekdays. Some sports teams charge more. Let's say when their team's playing the Lakers, they charge $100 a seat. When they're playing the Clippers, they charge $20 a seat. So it's based on the demand. That problem has been resolved. On April 16th, the council approved a pilot project for demand-based pricing, which allows the convention center, under certain circumstances, to increase or decrease rates up to 50%, which means they can charge between 16 cents and 48 cents per square foot. Secondly, LACC did not have a system in place to determine the actual cost of holding each event. So consequently, they're unable to tell the extent of any profit or loss on an individual event basis. With respect to overtime, we found that the department could potentially save $700,000 by developing its own pool of as-needed electricians. The department spends about $2 million a year for as-needed employees, and most of these as-needed employees work full-time in other city departments, which means they have to be paid overtime for any work at the convention center. With respect to the billing process, we noted that there's numerous adjustments being made in the system. Many of these adjustments do not have proper documentation to indicate why the adjustments were being made. Policies and procedures were unclear as to who could authorize billing adjustments. And then lastly, in the area of complimentary parking cards, we found that they were not being canceled in a timely manner. For example, we noted 28 cards that were used even though the event never took place, and 15 cards were used after the event concluded. LACC has reported.
What are these rental cars?
These are
parking
cards.
Parking cards.
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 Oh, okay.
The department has reported 30 recommendations is implemented, 6 in progress, and 3 that they're still analyzing. Within the next couple of weeks, what we plan to do is go ahead and ask for support documentation on some of these recommendations to substantiate the reported status.
I got to run to another meeting after this one.
Okay. Good afternoon. Priya Basi, Los Angeles Convention Center. As pointed out, we collaborated with the Office of the Controller to identify business-concentric means through which we can not only address the audit recommendations, but improve the overall business performance of the convention center. Within a month, less than a month after the audit was completed, we had already completed 11 of the recommendations and implemented means through which we can address the remainder of the recommendations. On April 15th, within 7 months of the completion of our audit, we have implemented 39 recommendations, with 6, as was pointed out, in progress, and 3 that we're seeking additional information and working with the Office of the Controller. In our review of the Controller audit, and the reason we were very encouraged by the tone and the engagement that the Controller exhibited throughout this process, and the Controller auditors were with us for over 9 months, was a clear understanding that Los Angeles needs to look at the convention center as a business entity operating in a very competitive environment. Thus, the support both by the Office of the Controller and the City Council, both of you being members that voiced your support, resulted in the convention center receiving the flexible demand-based pricing ability. That capability is going to allow us to increase our revenue base somewhere between 2% to 8%. We are actually, the ordinance itself is going to take effect in June, and we are already looking at events that are going to be taking advantage of that in the next fiscal year, which we obviously needed very much. The other core recommendation of the audit had to do with the overall building infrastructure of the convention center. The newest part of the convention center was built in 1993. That was the expansion of the South Hall, and the oldest part is a late 1960s design and structure. The city has not invested in the infrastructure of the convention center in the past decades. This is a major issue. I brought it up frequently in my engagements with council committees and at full council, in that the product we sell and we attract people to the city is the Los Angeles Convention Center facilities. To respond to that, and in recognition of also the controller's recommendation that the plan needs to be developed, a 5-year infrastructure plan was developed. We are cognizant of the financial stress on the city in order to be able to fund that package, and it's a package of somewhere between $16 to $20 million of work that needs to be done. Therefore, we've been working with the Office of the Mayor and the Office of the CAO, along with the ad hoc committee of the budget, to identify American ARA funds, stimulus monies that can go towards the infrastructure of the convention center. In January of 2009, the recommendations of the convention center in order to address the infrastructure issues were reviewed by the ad hoc committee and approved, and they're going through the process of submittal to the state. We look with much enthusiasm to see that process going through to the state and us receiving the funds to do major infrastructure improvements to the convention center. I believe we are a better organization because of this audit, and as we move forward, again, the point that I just want to underline, and the controller has been extremely supportive of this, is the understanding and recognition that this is a competitive business that we run at the convention center. The item about cost accounting on events is one that we are pursuing right now, and prior to the 1-year anniversary of the audit, we'll have completed all the 39 recommendations.
How does the conversation about the possibility of privatizing this system, how does that fit in with everything else that we're looking at doing?
That item actually was brought up during Budget and Finance Committee. Our response to that is basically policymakers of the city council and the mayor have built a roadmap that is to look at a governance change at the convention center. It's being studied within a working group that is headed by the Office of the CAO with CLA and other involved parties in there. Meanwhile, while that policy decision is being made, regardless of how the decision is, we need to run the business of the convention center in order to support the hospitality industry. As such, infrastructure improvements to the building of the convention center are extremely important, regardless of who's going to operate the building.
Now, obviously, I think part of why people are looking at privatizing is there's a lot of unrealized potential. I suspect the better we run this operation, the less compelling that becomes in a way, because if we're running at maximum efficiency ourselves, there may be less of an argument to privatize it because of the lack of that efficiency.
And again, I defer that. I was hired to run the business of the convention center, and again, I represent the women and men that day in, day out produce. But the issue of governance is really a policy decision, and again, part of that, though, as the Office of the CEO has pointed out, is being cognizant of the need to do investment in the product. Now, so part of the discussion in terms of what future governance structure is taken for the convention center is how best we can support the product. That we have to have investment at the convention center. And it's a large building, and it needs large investments.
Now, some of the claims why we're not as successful as we could be is that we're too small. Is there any planning, even in the distant future, to expand to the point where we could take on bigger conventions, or is that really an impossibility based on space constraints?
Two items. One is, even given our present size, we lack enough hotel rooms to support businesses that could locate at the convention center based on the size we have, because we couldn't support them with the hotel rooms.
Even now, at the size we're at.
Even now.
And even with the new hotel built right there.
Now with the new hotel, that whole equation has changed for the better. In that, for example, you've heard of the Microsoft event that was booked at the convention center. Without having what we have at LA Live and the hotel, it would be impossible to basically bring that event to the city. So if you look at priorities for Los Angeles, I think priority one would be actually bringing in additional hotel rooms online to be able to support the business that can locate at the convention center. And then as a second tier, we would be looking at adding more contiguous space at the convention center. Contiguous space is of extreme importance because many events don't even look at Los Angeles because we don't have what is necessary as far as contiguous space is concerned. For example, if we were to add about 100,000 square feet to the South Hall of the Convention Center, that puts us in direct competition and actually would put us in a better position competitively than Anaheim Convention Center. There should also be understanding. Our major competitors are Anaheim and San Diego. Anaheim already went through a major improvement to their facility, and San Diego Board Authority that oversees the convention center has approved a feasibility study to look at the expansion. So as we look in the future, and the future maybe 10 years from now, I think that's a very valid issue to be looking at.
Any other questions?
Let me ask you, have you done any analysis to determine what would be the amount of investment to bring the facility to state of the art, or where you'd be more competitive?
Certainly, $16 million. That's
16?
$16 million.
And what would that cover?
Actually, we have been working, as I said, with the ad hoc committee of the council in regards to the stimulus monies and came up with a 5-year plan that identifies specific projects. And these go from replacing the South Hall roof of the convention center, which is going to cost about $2 to $3 million, to just changing out the escalators, which have been working constantly for the past couple of decades. So there's a list, and we've identified, and we've worked with both General Services and Bureau of Engineering and our own folks in the convention industry. So at this point in time, that package has gone and been approved by the ad hoc committee, and they're going through the process where it has to go, I guess, to the state and then to the federal, basically, to get that funding.
Okay, so they're going for ARA?
Yeah, at this point, yes.
Yeah, okay. Then let me ask you on the issue of the electricians.
Yes.
Now, is that something that you can deal with through hiring hall as opposed to overtime of current city employees?
Yes, but let me just provide some additional information. One of the things that I just want to make clear, the overtime that is paid to anybody at the convention center to provide revenue generating services is completely 100% and more than that covered by the fees that we charge. The current agreements, and these have to do with labor negotiations, and these were done many, many years back, certainly before my time, have basically been in place so we can only hire electricians off of, whether it's GSD or DWP, whoever it is. So we have requested assistance from the Office of the CAO to work with us to look at what other methodology, including hiring hall, is available. So we'll be working with that body, the CAO and the Employee Relations Group there.
But that's part of what, the union MOU, or part of your operating agreement as to who you can hire?
Operating agreement.
So you'd still be hiring union electricians, but you just wouldn't be.
Certainly.
You wouldn't be limited to local 18 or whichever locals you're limited to now.
Well, one of the things, though, I have to say that has also been encouraging based on the controller's report was the support level that was given for us to hire retirees. We can hire retiree electricians that have expertise in the field, and not at overtime rates, but at straight time rates. So we are actually going out trying to increase our pool.
It's available now?
And how far are you along in that process?
On which part? On the retirees or working with the on the,
Both.
On the retirees, actually, we're doing it right now. We actually have a long list of retired electricians that we're working with to bring in. On the discussions with the CAO, CAO requested us to wait for the current processes that they're involved in and the negotiations that they're involved in to be completed, and then we'll take that on.
Okay, well, I don't have any other questions, so we'll move to receive and file this and ask you to come back in 6 months with an update.
Certainly. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Item number 5.
Item number 5 is a controller report relative to the city administrative officer's recommended plan towards fiscal sustainability.
The report cites many of the recommendations in the CAO report that are similar to those that the Controller Office has raised in many of the audits during the past several years. Many of them remain unimplemented. For example, in January 2008, the Controller Office issued a report related to enterprise risk management. That report had a series of recommendations and blueprint to implement the ERM for the city. The ERM allows the city to proactively manage and mitigate risk early on instead of reactively managing crisis. Although the CAO's plan discusses managing litigation risk, we believe a broader implementation of ERM is needed to effectively manage all city risk. Another example that we noted, Controller noted in her letter, was in January 2009, the Controller issued a comprehensive audit of city vehicles, including home garaging and pool cars. The report identified opportunities that city can save over $2 million annually by reducing the number of pool cars and by better controls over home garaging. Although some of our recommendations were implemented, many remain unimplemented in order to realize the full cost savings. Another example was in November 2007 and March of 2009, the Controller, in coordination with the Mayor's Office and also the Council, CLA, issued 3 management audit of city pension plans. That report identified opportunities for consolidation, which can save the city over $500 million in 3 years. The consolidation recommendations related to overlap in the areas of audit, investment, and legal services. For consolidation, the plans can also benefit from increased revenues from security, lending, and other investment opportunities. Today, these recommendations haven't been implemented. Recital also the convention center, we already discussed that, I'm not going to get into it. Asset management was another example that we cited in our report. In 2008, the Controller issued a follow-up audit on asset management. That audit disclosed that cities did not establish a strategy to maximize the benefit of its real estate asset portfolio. After our audit, however, it was encouraging to see that in January 2010, GSD released a new 10-year strategic real estate plan, which discusses most of the issues that we raised in 2008. The plan, however, does not address the concept of maximizing financial value or return on properties. For example, trade or leasing of the higher value properties in exchange for properties developed that meet the city needs. Capital project delivery method was another report that Controller issued. In fact, in 3 of the report that Controller issued related to capital improvement project. The city still continues to deliver most of its capital project using a design build method. In 2008, as I mentioned, we issued several reports that suggested that other project delivery methods be used to the city to bring the capital project in less cost to the city. For example, the city is not using the different delivery methods like construction management and risk or the best value integrated project delivery method. That's pretty much summarizes the Controller's memo dated February 25th.
Now, how much attention do you think we paid to all of these during the budget process? Did we make some progress on some of these items? Because I know some of them were at least discussed. At a minimum, the idea of consolidating some or all of the functions of the pension plans were discussed in the context of the budget.
I believe some of them were adverse in terms of budget discussion, but I'm not quite familiar with all the details going on.
Yeah, particularly, that was probably the one of these that I was the most focused on, and we raised the issue a number of times, although there was a lot of resistance on the part of some of the pension plans, and they all said that they thought the $500 million figure over 30 years was a high figure, which whether it is or it isn't, I think there's still a lot of money to be saved. Is the controller's office still working closely with Lacers and trying to pressure them to take a closer look at this?
This is actually a little bit different from the typical audit reports that controller issues. This is a management study that is required by charter to be done by controller, mayor, and council. So it's not just a controller report.
Right.
And typically, we don't require any responses in the type of a study that we do. But I understand the items are being scheduled for your committee soon in terms of responses from different pensions.
Yeah, I think this is one of the better opportunities to save a large amount of money and not really lose much in terms of efficiency. I think that they do a lot of very similar things in these three pension systems, especially in terms of investment advice and relatively similar returns. So all the things that we can avoid doing in triplicate in these systems, I think is a very obvious potential savings. So whatever we could do to work together on that, I look forward to it. Do you know if anything has been done to implement your recommendations on pool cars and home garaging?
We have received responses from GSD, fire, and some other departments. Police, we're still waiting to receive responses. There have been some improvement in terms of reducing the number of pool vehicles. I believe they have a reduction of about 9% in departmental pools and some reduction in home garaging. But still, we believe opportunities to do more. One specifically recommendation that we had was related to utilization rate. Based on the audit that we discovered, the average mileage on city car are about 6,000 miles. And we did a best practice benchmarking with others. Their average utilization rate of up to 12,000 miles, meaning we have opportunity to reduce and better use our cars, and there will be tremendous saving on that. That recommendation hasn't been implemented. Our understanding is GSC is in the process of conducting that study to see whether the 6,000 or the 7,000 or the 10,000 or the 12,000 utilization rate is justified for the city, but that hasn't been done.
And how about your suggestions on risk management?
The risk management, although CAO was supportive at the time that we issued our report, it kind of did not get implemented because of shortage of budget prices. And to my understanding, has not yet been implemented and is still pending.
But it's being reviewed.
It's being considered. I believe it's just having staff at CAO to be able to do that.
Right, and while everyone else is looking at the budget and layoffs and a lot of the other moving parts, probably won't get focused on, I would imagine, until after that process is completed.
It is extremely important for the city to have that concept of ERM in place, so when it comes at the next crisis, we are better prepared to manage.
Now, I would agree with that, so I want to make sure it's not something that's lost in the shuffle. And of course, we discussed the convention center, and they obviously did pay attention to the demand-based pricing concept and are in the process of implementing that, which is a good thing. What about the capital project delivery? Has that been looked at closely as a policy?
I believe Chief Engineer is exploring opportunities for the city to see if it can use better delivery methods. At one point, discussion was that charter does not allow the city to proceed with a different delivery. That may not be the case. So my understanding is city engineer is exploring different ways, but actually they haven't been implemented yet. Still in more of a study or research.
Well, thank you. Thank you for this report. And if you see opportunities for us in this committee to help move any of these ideas forward, obviously you and the controller should keep in touch with my office and with this committee, and try to be as helpful as we can on an ongoing basis.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to note that at some future date, your committee will having I think not a dual, but a triple committee meeting relative to the consolidation of the pension plans. And that date will be announced by your chair when you have made those arrangements.
So very good. We'll obviously continue to push on that issue as a good and hopefully not to be missed opportunity. Thank you. Item number 6.
Just for a point of clarification, Mr. Chair, you would like to note and file the report, the controller report for
Yes,
item number
yes.
5.
Thank you. Thank you for that reminder. We'll note and file that report.
Okay, item number 6 is a city controller report dated November 5, 2009 and February 22nd, 2010, relative to a follow-up audit of the Forensic DNA Backlog Reduction Grant Program awards.
Controller's Office. The objective of this follow-up audit was to look at the statuses of recommendations from an audit report issued in October 2008. The October 2008 audit found a backlog of over 7,000 untested sexual assault kits, and that the department had lost about $500,000 in grant funds due to a lack of oversight. This audit found that LAPD has taken a number of positive steps. They completed a comprehensive physical inventory of kits in the freezer. They increased the number of outsourced kits, hired additional criminalists, and centralized controls over the kits. The follow-up audit showed that the backlog had been reduced to approximately 2,500 kits from the original 7,000. Some of the findings.
And that was as of what date?
The audit was issued in November 2009, so right around that time, about October 2009.
Okay.
And some of the findings, although the backlog of untested kits had been significantly reduced, we noted a secondary backlog of about 1,100 kits. These are kits that have been tested by outside contractors that were awaiting what's called a technical review by the Scientific Investigation Division to confirm the test results. Secondly, the department lacked a comprehensive information system to facilitate tracking the status of rape kits. The department was utilizing 3 different DNA databases, one by the Property Division, one by the Robbery Homicide Division, and one by the Scientific Investigation Division. Since there was no integration, each system must be researched to determine a complete picture of what's happening on a particular case. And then finally, we found that the grants tracking system was not being updated in a timely manner. Several expenditures and deposits had occurred 3 months prior that had been not posted to that system. And the purpose of that system was, it's my understanding, to make it a real-time information system to get current information. The report contained 9 recommendations for improvement. The department's response in January 2010 indicated overall concurrence with the findings and recommendations. And as part of our follow-up process, what we're going to do is we'll be asking for a more detailed status report. That's probably going to happen within the next 2 to 4 weeks.
And we'll obviously want to hear that as well once you've gotten that and commented on it.
Yeah, what happens is usually we ask for the status, and then we might ask for documentation on certain recommendations, and then we issue a formal document back to the department with our evaluation of that particular status report.
And if we could have a report from the LAPD rep as well, and let us know where we are on this.
Yes, Yvette Sanchez-Owens. I'm the commanding officer of the Scientific Investigation Division for LAPD. Like the controller's audit mentioned, we were in concurrence with most of the recommendations, and in fact had been working on several of their recommendations when they came and did the follow-up audit. I'm happy to report today, as of March 31st, we had gotten that historical backlog down to around 600 kits. So we've made remarkable progress in the last couple of years with the resources that not only the city has given to us, but also private donations and grants. We've done quite
Does
a
that
bit of
include
work.
the 1,100, by the way? Is that still backlogged?
We have a total backlog right now of somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1,800 kits, and that's including the historical backlog and contemporary kits that we can't get to because we're still building the infrastructure in-house.
That's still a pretty significant improvement. That's exciting news. Now, is there, I know there's state legislation that in theory would prevent us from needing that extra review step. Would that eliminate those 1,100 as backlog, or would there still be a step we need to take?
I believe what you're referring to is the FBI standard, which requires us to do that secondary technical review on outsourced kits.
I can't remember if it's state or federal
It's
legislation.
federal.
Federal legislation
It's a
that needs to
federal
change that.
potential legislation. It's just being kicked around. Nothing official has come out yet. However, we've been in discussion with the FBI itself, trying to get them to do the right thing on their own. And in fact, they are looking at the situation and considering a pilot program to start in September. One of my staffers was just back there in Washington, D.C. last week, working with them to come up with a pilot program that potentially will use us as the guinea pig.
That would be terrific. When do we think we would hit the point where we're actually up to date?
That's totally dependent on the city's ability to give us the resources we outlined in our plan for building our infrastructure in-house. We're a little bit behind on that because of the city's financial situation. However, we are making incremental progress on that plan. And as soon as we get the full complement of everything we've asked for, probably about a year to a year and a half after we get the last staffing in-house and trained, we will be able to handle everything contemporary and have minimal reliance on outsourcing.
Now, with the current funding level, will we at least stay where we are, or will we start to develop a backlog?
We probably will start to develop a backlog if we don't maintain a steady stream of funding to continue the outsourcing.
And is that currently in the budget, or are we behind on that?
The last I heard, I have not checked as to what was approved yesterday, but prior to yesterday, my understanding was the city was planning to put $1.8 million into our outsourcing funds. That, in addition to other grants that we have lined up, should be enough to get us through the next fiscal year.
That would be great. Anything else that we should know?
No, we're committed to solving this problem and committed to working with the city to finally get to a point where we can handle this in-house.
So the additional positions that we put in the budget this year, we think would get us there.
There's
to the point where the
another-
backlog is eliminated and we can just keep up in-house.
There's another 10 positions that we asked for next fiscal year. There are also, I believe, 16 positions that were asked for this fiscal year that we have yet to have authority and funding to fill. So that's what I mean about the delay. It's being staggered a little bit because of the city's financial situation, but I think everything is moving in the right direction.
Well, that's encouraging. This obviously was a disastrous situation before, and I'm glad it was flagged and moved on, and now we're not in the situation of a huge missed opportunity that we were a little while ago.
Right.
Well, this is encouraging. Anything we can do to be helpful and nudge this along, we certainly will want to do, as I'm sure the Public Safety Committee is in the same boat, as in terms of being supportive of making sure this gets adequate funding and movement. Any other comment from the Controller's Office? Any other thoughts on this? We're pretty satisfied with the success that we've made in terms of the movement in this area.
Yes.
Well, I thank you both, and we'll receive and file this item as well. And thank you for all the progress that you've made on this. And I believe, is that the last item? One more, right? No, that is the last one. All right, in that case, we are adjourned.